I would believe the BBC on accuracy and impartiality over Donald Trump any day of the week.
Editing out a paedophile was also a drag queen and a member of a local pride organisation. That's institutional bias, isn't it?
In this video, you're about to witness everything that's gone wrong with our mainstream media today. And stay right to the end because I'm going to show you why the BBC scandal feels far more personal than you might expect.
The point,
they're not neutral, are they?
The point is that you are trying to cherry-pick to mislead people. And actually, the whole reason...
Fake news.
The reason you hate the BBC is because it's impartial.
Listen,
that's why you're threatened by it.
The current row is about this dossier that was released that exposed all these horrendous things, but the major thing being that they misrepresented the president of the free world. And I really hope Trump does sue them for £1 billion quid, because they've got until Thursday at 5 o'clock. This is the other thing. Samir Shah, the chairman, said today, I'm considering issuing an apology to Donald Trump. He should be crawling on his belly to issue an apology, because if he doesn't, they're going to get sued for £1 billion quid. And quite right.
What Mr. Butworth really means when he calls the BBC impartial is that the BBC aligns with his own worldview.
It's things like editing out the fact that a paedophile was, no, not one that worked for the BBC this time, no, a paedophile was also a drag queen and a member of a local pride organisation group. So they've just removed that from an article. And then they've got reporters that work for them with I'm an LGBT ally at the bottom of their thing. I mean, that's institutional bias, isn't it?
I think the challenge you have is like all of these big state-funded or publicly funded institutions, they basically start to exist not to serve the public who pay for them, but to actually serve their own agenda and their own needs. Why no one thinks that they have any institutional bias at the BBC is because they all agree with each other. And they go to work and they say, well, did you see that article in The Guardian or The Independent? Oh, wasn't it wonderful? And that's the challenge, is there's no mindset that goes in there and says, well, actually, what do the British public think? It's all about what the BBC thinks.
And Benjamin Butterworth, the journalist there, is openly gay. So anything that supports LGBT issues, true or not, is something he's naturally inclined to agree with.
You have, and that's what people are fed up with. And let's not, it's 180 quid the licence fee. If you don't pay it, you go to prison. So I'm perfectly happy for the BBC to carry on and produce great radio programmes like The Archers and things like that, things I enjoy. But I want the British public to be given the ability to support the BBC if they think it produces content they want. And if we created a subscription, I think the BBC would actually be better.
And to hold them accountable. Because if they're not telling the truth, you shouldn't be able to dodge that by forcing everyone who watches live TV to pay for it. Their revenue should take the hit.
But the idea that everyone running the BBC is left-wing is nonsense, because Sir Robbie Gibb was in Theresa May's Conservative government. Nick Robinson...
Theresa May's Conservative government?
Yes.
You're not going to
what did he do? Was he a political...
Nick Robinson was chair of his Conservative Party at Oxford University.
Hello,
right?
Nick Robinson this morning tried to
Tim Davies was a Conservative council candidate.
One reason Liberals call anyone on the right far right is because they don't see that the mass immigration, high-tax Conservatives were never truly conservative. They weren't right-wing at all.
What you're trying to do is take a handful of mistakes, and the Trump edit was clearly a mistake, and trying to make that reflective. You've had your chance. Trying to make that reflective of 21,000 employees, news output that occurs 24 hours a day across the entire globe. There are many stories which are of huge value and huge public service journalism, and the idea that one mistake is reflective of that organisation is nonsense. And the truth is, I would believe the BBC on accuracy and impartiality over Donald Trump any day of the week.
What do you think he'd say if the BBC put out fake stories about asylum seekers, illegal migrants, black people, gay people, or trans people? Do you honestly think he'd keep the same tone? Shameful.
How many mistakes the BBC
I've read my notes here, Carol. So they made two a week. They made two a week, and which may not be as many as people think. But the challenge is that documentary wasn't just a mistake; it was an attempt at international election interference.
Was it?
Well, of course it was. It mashed up Donald Trump's speech to pretend that he'd called for an attack on the Capitol building. It was completely untrue. untrue. What may not have been successful election interference, it was still an attempt at election interference. And I predicted this time last week that Donald Trump would sue the BBC. What I predict this week is they won't get the House in order by 5 o'clock on Friday to respond, and I suspect that Donald Trump will carry out his threat.
This is the cognitive dissonance you see in many woke people. He's trying to argue that the BBC releasing a documentary on Donald Trump right before a presidential election wasn't an attempt to influence anything. How ridiculous is that?
They're going to lose more license space because people will listen to the statements that the chairman made today, saying that everyone's imagining the bias. And
it's just another example of the bias at work. Almost everyone coming out of universities today is taught that the West and England are institutionally racist. So when that BBC story appeared, suggesting there was a direct link between being an ethnic minority and paying higher insurance, they simply ran with it. They accepted it instantly, even though they never questioned the other factors that raise car insurance, things like living in areas with high crime or high claim rates. They didn't bother. And this dossier exposed that. So it's not only about major global issues like Donald Trump or Israel, it's also about the things that shape how ordinary people relate to each other, how we see one another, how we feel about the country we live in. And this really matters because the BBC, whether you like it or not, is viewed worldwide as the face of British media. So when people abroad watch how British media, from their perspective, treats its closest ally in the United States, interfering with their elections like this or reporting on the Israel-Gaza conflict the way they do, what impact do you think that has on our allies? What impact do you think it has on our enemies? It makes them believe, yes, this country is weak. This country wants to paint itself as the villain. They enjoy feeling ashamed of themselves, so they see an opening. And it's no surprise we're witnessing the border situation we're seeing, our crime rising the way it is. It's unbelievable. Now, many people will claim that the BBC only went after Donald Trump because they dislike him for being a racist, a misogynist, a sexist, whatever labels they repeat. But that's nonsense. And we know it's nonsense because the BBC has been full of misogynists, abusers, and awful people over the years. So what did they really dislike about Trump? They disliked that he opposed mass immigration. They disliked that he pushed back on trans ideology. They disliked that he rejected the entire woke agenda. That's why they attacked him, which means they were willing to lie about the president of our closest ally during an election simply because he shared views that you and I hold. So what does that tell you about what they'd be willing to do to ordinary Brits? This is why the whole thing is a disgrace. And the fact that our government uses its power to force us to fund it through the license fee is absurd. It's long overdue that they're held accountable for their lies.